Hey, what's going on? My name's Robert, and you are watching Southpaw Autoworks. This is the Turbo 400. This video is all about the pump. We're going to show what it takes to assemble it, install it, and check the front unit end play. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Angle it your way a little bit and then you can get a shot of it.
Yeah, good.
Okay, gonna work on the pump now. One thing we want to do while we're here is we want to remove this snap ring, move the boost valve, the pressure regulator valve and spring for inspection and cleaning. And we're also going to do a little update on it, if you will. So we've got to squeeze this little snap ring in here. We do have some considerable spring pressure behind it, so you want to be careful with this. I'm going to try and hold down on that with my thumb. Okay, release that snap ring first. Boost valve sleeve, the boost valve is falling down in there. It's your pressure regulator spring. There's the boost valve. That fits in there. These are a common wear item on these. All right. Do is take the valve out, flip it over, and see if she's got a lot of play in there, and that does. Trying to hold that as steady as I can. That indicates that sleeve and or valve are worn pretty good. At this point, I would replace these items. Okay, not a normal wear item. Not an item you get in an overhaul kit. You got to buy this separately from another company. So, but I would replace that one if I were building this for a live job. Pressure regulator spring itself is going to get replaced. That's going to be part of the Transgo valve body kit that we're putting in this. Okay. Now, still yet to come out is the pressure regulator valve. Okay. That fits in the pump itself. Little stem side faces up. When it's in the pump and assembled, your pressure regulator spring is going to sit on there like that. Okay. That's what's known as a spring seat that the spring sits against. And underneath that, quite commonly, you'll find the little spacer here, which is known as the horseshoe spacer. So that, once again, just so you know the order of assembly, when the valve's in there, horseshoe spacer goes in, spring seat sets over the top of it, like that. So we've got the pressure regulator valve and boost valve out of the pump. At this point, I want to show you this Transgo valve body kit. Their trademark is shift kit. Okay, it's not meant to make hard shifts. Okay, just some updates, some new pressure regulator valve spring. Cool thing about it is most of the shift kits, he also gives you a lot of literature, a lot of information on things to look for, problem areas in the transmission, as well as, of course, the instructions on how to install the shift kit. Other cool thing about it is a lot of times your separator plate for your valve body can be worn real bad or could get rust on it and so forth. Includes that in the shift kit as well. So that's kind of cool. And the reason I break that out right now is because we need our new pressure regulator spring that he gives you to replace the old one. And we'll install that, as well as some of the other stuff I'll show you that are updates for the valve body. And as we do the valve body, I'll show you that as we go. But in this, he just basically gives you the outline for the pressure regulator valve, new yellow spring, and his recommendation on this is discard the horseshoe spacer. Okay, we showed you that when we took the valve out. So what we're going to do is reassemble. If I were doing this on a live job, of course, I would clean this up much better, and I would be replacing that boost valve assembly. So we'll take that. Get these other little springs out of here. We're going to put our pressure regulator valve back in the pump. Drop the new spring in that he gives you. And then what we're going to need to do on this old boost valve is some assembly goo to kind of stick it in place in that sleeve. Otherwise, when we invert it, put it in here and try and get our snap ring in, that valve's going to want to drop out on us. So he also gives you a new snap ring to go in there. So if you damage the other one or lose it, you've got your replacement. So we've got to try and get this boost valve in far enough to expose the groove for the snap ring. Oh, I'll push that down in there. Looks like it maybe got lucky and got her in there on the first try. I'm holding it just to make sure. And make sure that snap ring is all the way in the groove. Once again, we left out the horseshoe spring or horseshoe spacer that goes on that pressure regulator valve, okay, per his recommendation. We got rid of that, the snap ring and the old pressure regulator valve, okay. Not a whole lot more to do on this half of the pump, which is considered the stator half of the pump, okay. We do have to put our two sealing rings on here. Once again, like I showed you on the center support, we're going to take a new ring, hook it, run it through the snap or the sealing ring groove. Make sure it does not grab or hang up on there, okay? They've got to be free to float on there. We're going to take our pump washer that came off to start with. We may change that according to end play once we check it, but for now we'll put that back on. Gives us a starting point or reference point. Put the new rings on. Hook those, make sure they're free in the groove. So like I said, pretty much done with that half. We are looking at the surface here to make sure we don't have any major grooves or gouges or wear in this area, okay? That's directly where the pump gears ride, if you will, there. So we want to make sure that they have not caused an issue. Otherwise, we would have to have this resurfaced or replaced. Once again, just like the rest of it, we'll inspect the bushings and or replace them as necessary, okay? Clean the gasket surface, make sure that's good. And then we're going to move on to what's called the pump body. That's what you're looking at in the front of the trans. I've already taken out the front seal and the bushing that go in here. We're going to go ahead and put a bushing and seal in this just to kind of show you how that sets up. Got the new bushing out of our bushing kit here. We'll take that to the arbor press that in, flip it over, put a new seal in front of it. Okay, we're at the arbor press here, going to put in our new pump bushing. I start with a bushing driver that's oversized, if you will, larger than the bushing. I like to press the bushing in straight and flush that way. Take it down till it stops, using that oversized bushing driver, okay? Now we're going to find one that actually fits inside the bushing there, okay? And we're going to give it just a little touch below the surface of where we stopped. Just a little bit right there. That's it. That's all we need to do. My main concern here is only going deep enough to be below this surface here where the gears ride, and not going too deep so as to cover any more of this hole than necessary. The reason I mentioned this hole here, this is known as a drain back hole. Okay, we don't want to cover any more of that hole than absolutely necessary. Many GM transmissions, this hole was made too small and created a real issue up here in this front seal area. The reason being is oil is constantly fed or pushed past this bushing into the seal area. It has to have somewhere to go to escape, and it's that hole right there that does it. If you block off too much of that hole, the oil can't go anywhere. It will hydraulically push the front seal, or at least the lip of it, out of the front of the trans, creating a massive leak. It was a big problem for GM on several transmissions. Many of them, we actually drilled this hole larger just to try and keep that problem from happening. So just deep enough, get in here, because your inner gear for your pump is going to ride flush right there. We don't want that gear touching the bushing.
Hey, real quick, if this type of content is adding value, please let us know by hitting that like button. It does help the channel, and we do greatly appreciate your feedback.
Okay, we'll push in our front seal. Okay, once again, using one of the larger bushing drivers that at least meets the outside of the seal. Sticky. Push that in flush until it stops. Watch your toes. Right. Okay, we got our bushing and seal in. Don't have a converter handy to fit this, but if I did have my torque converter, I would set this down over the hub, check the fit of that bushing. At this point, just make sure that everything was good. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna put a little bit of assembly goo on the bushing itself, okay? And I recommend not the assembly goo, but a regular grease to go on this front seal, okay? It's being an external seal, we can use a heavier grease on that. So we got a handy dandy stand here. Got to put our gears in, inner and outer. A couple things to remember, especially on the GM products and a few others. There are different thicknesses of gears available for these. They made them with several different thicknesses. The 400 pumps normally take the thickest gear available, which I believe is the 737 gear, or 727, 727 thousandths. There was also 725, 723, 721. So just making sure you've got the right gears in there. If this were a live job and I were building it, I would replace the gear set. Okay, I would not be reusing the same set of gears in there. So once again, whether we're building it with these gears or a new set of gears, we want to check clearances here. You're going to lay a flat edge across here, check it with a feeler blade. You're going to measure the thickness of the gears and or the depth of the pocket, making sure about 0.02 of an inch is what you want to see maximum between the height of the gears and the surface of the pump, as well as the outside of the gear in this area, okay? About a maximum of 0.02 right in there, okay? Another thing very critical on the GM pumps is the lug on the drive gear is offset. So you can see it's much closer to this upper surface where you've got a little space in between here. That's going to face down. The offset's always going to face up away from the converter hub itself. Many times guys make the mistake, flip it over, put it in that way. When it's installed in the vehicle, the torque converter hub is going to hook onto here and literally drive this into the stator half and ruin the trans within a matter of minutes from the time you start it. Okay, very critical to remember the offset. Okay, got to be facing up away from the converter hub. Outer gear, many times not a much difference. Okay, there may be a chamfer, slight chamfer on the inner edge of the gear itself. Okay, if you do see a larger chamfer, that's usually going to face down, okay, into the pump body. Also, if this were a live job, we would be flooding this with transmission fluid right now as we're assembling it, okay? Completely filling it up as messy as you can make it with transmission fluid. Pumps will not draw fluid out of the pan and through a filter if they cannot create somewhat of a suction. And if you don't have fluid in there and it's dry, it will not create a suction, okay? You'll burn that pump up in a matter of minutes. So flooding that with oil, okay? Stator half's got to go on here. We've got to line up some holes here with holes in the stator itself. And what we can do is just rotate it around until we find that they all match up, okay? Should be somewhere in that area. There we go. Okay. I do this number a little bit just to knock down any crap that may be on the surface of the pump or the gears. Okay. We need some bolts to go in here. If Robert can get a close-up of the bolts that I've laid out over here, I've got them all pretty much separated. Okay. We've got what are generally the longest bolts here, which are going to be valve body bolts, including the one that holds the detent on. Those are all the same length. Okay. Then 3 little guys that you take out of the valve body also, those are all grouped together. Okay. We've got 6 more here for this pump, but that's to hold the pump to the case. Okay. And then we've got a group of 5 here, which are kind of offset a little bit. You've got 1 long, what I call 2 mediums, and 2 shorts that go in the pump itself. Okay. And if you look at the pump, you'll see where the bolts go in here. We've got 1 taller, 2 mediums, 2 shorts. So if you just take all your bolts, separate them out by that, there's our 2 mediums, there's 1 long, and what I call 2 shorts. Okay. You're going to start all those. Now we need an alignment strap. We have to have something to go around the outside of the pump, hold those 2 halves straight here. Otherwise, when you go to flip this over and put it in the pump, in the case, you're going to have a hell of a time. You definitely need a strap to align this. Robert can tell you how to source that. Either get the strap to put on there that they actually make for it, or you can do the hardware or plumbing supply and put a couple of large hose clamps together and keep your pump halves aligned. And then as I'm doing that, I'm also eyeballing down through the 2 halves of the pump and rotating them as necessary to make sure the holes are lined up about as best as we can get them. Finish tightening this up. Hold the 2 halves together nice and tight. We'll run these down, torque them. Off the top of my head, the torque I use on these is 18 foot-pounds usually for the pump halves and the pump to the case. But of course you can Google it on your phone or whatever and look up the spec.
In addition to torquing these bolts to spec, we also utilize a torquing sequence. In this case, it's the star pattern. And then once we're done torquing everything in the star pattern, we'll make one last pass going around in 1 revolution, torquing each of these bolts as we go, just to make sure that we don't miss any bolts. Need Turbo 400 parts, tools, and or supplies? Check out the resources section in the video description down below. So at this point in the build, the pump's getting ready to be installed, and it would be super tempting to install the pump gasket into the transmission case and to install the pump O-ring. However, we would be getting ahead of ourselves. Prior to installing this pump into the transmission case for the last time, we need to do an in-play check. And if we leave this O-ring on the pump, it's not only going to make it more difficult to install the pump into the transmission case, but it's definitely going to make it a whole heck of a lot more difficult to get the pump back up and out of the case should we need to make an adjustment to the in-play, which is replacing one of those selective washers. So we're going to leave the O-ring off of the pump, and we're going to do a dry run without the paper gasket on the pump.
Okay. Once again, leaving the gasket and O-ring off for our end play check. And take the pump. Okay. You can hear that sounded pretty solid when we hit there, so we know we're down all the way. We don't want to force that. There are those metal sealing rings that go on the forward drum. We don't want to have to hammer that in place because we could break one of those drums. Now, a couple different ways we can check the in-play. Normally, a lot of times I'll just take a couple of pump bolts, put them in and tighten them down. As long as we hold down on the pump against the case while we lift the input shaft, we should get a decent in-play check, or fairly accurate anyway. Okay. We You can actually hear that, okay? If we wanted to measure that, what we can do is take a dial caliper, measure from the input shaft down to the edge of the stator. Once again, zero that. Lift up on here, the input shaft, measure again from here to here, and that would give us our end play clearance. One thing to take into consideration, pump gasket thickness, okay? Pump gaskets are about 15 thousandths. When you compress them and the pump is torqued, they're about 12 thousandths, so you lose 3. So any number that you have here to start with, we're gonna add 12 thousandths because that's the thickness of the gasket compressed, okay? So just my experience off the top of my head, I'm gonna say that's probably 10, 15 thousandths. We add another 12, we're in the 20s. That's pretty close for a Turbo 400, okay? Don't remember the spec off the top of my head, but tighter is generally better. I go on the tight side. If we're too tight or too loose, this is the washer we use to adjust that, okay? Too tight, we just make it a little bit thinner washer to go on there. If you buy a washer kit, many times with selectives, that will be these washers here, they'll give you 3 or 4 of those different thicknesses to allow you to adjust that. Remember the thick washer I put on the forward hub, okay? That's about 30 thousandths thicker than the factory washer. So if we hadn't put that on there, we're probably in the 40 to 50 thousandths range as far as end play. So that worked out pretty good. The idea is not to go too thick here, okay? Because you could push your forward drum off of these rings and create a leakage there. So we'd rather make it up somewhere else in the unit than go really, really thick here, okay? So at this point, I would call this good. I would put my gasket in, put my O-ring around the pump, put some assembly lube, put that baby on, put the bolts in and torque it. Note on your pump bolts, depending on model and year, you're going to have some type of a sealing washer on the head of the bolt. If there's a groove in the head of the bolt recessed underneath there, you're going to put the little round O-rings on there. Okay, these do not have that groove. Therefore, you put the washers in place. All right, they simply slide over the bolt like that, and that's a sealing washer. Trying to keep any fluid that might seep up past the threads from leaking out the front of the trans. Just to give you an example, although these bolts are out of a different GM transmission, if you can see the recess there, that would be the style that would take our O-ring, okay, flat surface like this one, it's going to take the washer. Also on these, drop a blue Loctite on each pump bolt, torque them down to about 15 to 18 foot-pounds, and we'd be good to go as far as the basic unit.
Just like the back side of the pump, the front side of the pump gets torqued using the star pattern, and we make one last pass all the way around the pump just to make sure we didn't miss any pump bolts. I want to take a quick second and show what it takes to read the front end play on this transmission using a dial caliper. So I've already got a couple bolts in here. These are just finger tight, and that's going to hold the pump in place, prevent it from lifting upward when I lift on the shaft. Speaking of lifting on the shaft, I'm going to put these locking pliers onto the splines. That's just on there lightly. That's going to allow me to lift, and in this case, not use my hand. So I can keep my hand free to use the dial caliper. So for this measurement, we're going to use the depth rod that comes out of the base of the dial caliper. I'm going to extend that rod pretty far, and I'm going to rest the bottom of that rod right against the top of the stator. With the end of the depth rod pushing against the stator tube, now I just push the rest of the dial caliper down until the base of the dial caliper comes into contact with the input shaft. Okay, my measurement, I could read the whole measurement out, which is 1 inch 600 and we'll call it 60 thousandths of an inch. I don't really need that whole measurement. We just need the measurement off of the dial because we're going to be dealing with thousandths of an inch. So we're going to call that 60. It's really in between 60 thousandths. And then I'm going to do it again, but this time we're going to lift up on the shaft. I'm going to hold while I grab this measurement. And we've got 79 thousandths of an inch. So we've got, on the high end with the shaft lifted up, we've got 79 thousandths of an inch. And with the shaft down or at rest, we've got roughly 60 thousandths of an inch. So that difference is 19 thousandths of an inch. But that's not our end play because we don't have the gasket in there. And like Andy said, the gasket, at least when it's compressed, that gasket's going to be roughly 12 thousandths of an inch. So we need to take our 19 thousandths of an inch, let's just call it 20 to make it easy, add 12 thousandths, which is gives us our total end play of 32 thousandths of an inch. It's important to note this transmission, I'm not even sure this was the same case we've been using in the video series so far. The internals are different, so that's why we've got a different end play measurement from what Andy had. So in this case, 32 thousandths of an inch may fall within spec, but it is on the looser side of things, and we like to tighten things up. So in order to adjust the end play, we got to get the pump back out of the transmission and gain access to the thrust washer. So down here, I've got the pump back out of the transmission case. Here's that thrust washer I was talking about right here. In order to remove it from the backside of the pump, we got to get these sealing rings out of the way first. With those out of the way, the washer comes right off. This one happens to be a number 3. The thickness on that is a range, and the thickness on that happens to be 93 thousandths of an inch up to 97 thousandths of an inch. How thick is it? We're going to have to measure it. I've got the dial caliper zeroed. I'm going to throw that on the thrust washer, and we've got a reading of roughly 93 thousandths of an inch. So it's on the tighter side of that spec. Our total unit end play currently is 31 thousandths of an inch, and the spec for this is 7 thousandths to 24 thousandths. So again, we're a little high at 31, and we want to tighten it up. We could shoot for like the middle of the end play spec, so let's shoot for, say, 15 thousandths of an inch. How do we get there? Well, we need a thicker washer. How much thicker? Well, we just got to do some basic math. So the end play is currently at 31 thousandths of an inch. We want to get it down to 15 thousandths of an inch. The difference between those is 16 thousandths of an inch. So that's how much thickness needs to be added to this washer. So the washer, as we know, is 93 thousandths of an inch thick. We need to add 16 thousandths. That puts us at the number of 109 thousandths of an inch. The only problem with that is if you were to look at all the available selective washers for the Turbo 400, for the front end play, I should specify, 109 thousandths is not an option. Now, the number 4 thrust washer ranges anywhere from 104 thousandths of an inch up to 108, which is really dang close. So if we were to step up to the number 4 thrust washer, again, it's going to vary in thickness. If it happened to be on the thinner side at 104 thousandths of an inch, that would give us 20 thousandths of an inch total end play once we ran the numbers. And if it happened to be on the thick side of that number 4 washer, if it was 108 thousandths of an inch, that would put us at a total end play of 16 thousandths of an inch, which is real close to what we were shooting for at 15 thousandths. We could go up another thrust washer thickness. So we're at number 3. We just ran the numbers for the number 4 thrust washer. If we were to jump up to the number 5 thrust washer, that one ranges anywhere from 115 thousandths of an inch up to a thicker end of 119 thousandths of an inch. If we were to install or measure the number 5 that we purchased, and it happened to be on the thin side at 115 thousandths of an inch, then our total end play would be at 9 thousandths of an inch, which would be great. That's on the tight end of the spectrum, you know, the tight side being 7 thousandths of an inch. If we can hit 9 thousandths of an inch, excuse me, that would be great. The only problem with the number 5 thrust washer is on the thick end of it, it could be as thick as 119 thousandths of an inch. And if that were the case, our total end play would fall at 5 thousandths of an inch, which is too tight. Again, 7 thousandths is the lowest. So with all that in mind, I think we can rule the number 5 thrust washer out, and we would be running a number 4 thrust washer, which is going to land us anywhere from 16 thousandths of an inch to 24 thousandths of an inch, which is right in the middle of our target there. So that's the math involved for trying to identify the exact thrust washer that I need. So if I was on a budget and I'm like, I don't want to order the full-blown selective thrust washer kit, I just want to order the one washer that I need. That's the math that I would do to arrive at the correct thrust washer. However, if I don't want to take the time to do all that math, there is a simpler way. So the down and dirty way is to identify whatever thrust washer I have. In this case, it's a number 3. I would grab a number 4 thrust washer, install that on here. And if I want to make it even quicker, I would actually put some assembly gel on there, then install the thrust washer. And now this thrust washer won't fall off. You know, in other words, I do not have to reinstall both these rings. The thrust washer is going to stay in place. I take the pump, I pop it back into the transmission case, and then I do another end play reading. If I'm not happy with that, I pull it back out. I replace that thrust washer with the next thickest one up. I say thickest one up because in this case, we were trying to tighten up the end play. Of course, if we were trying to loosen the end play, instead of going with thicker washers, we would go with thinner selective washers. At any rate, once I find the end play that I'm happy with, it's just a matter of pulling the pump out, reinstalling both of these sealing rings, install the O-ring on the pump, put the gasket in place, and get everything reinstalled and all the bolts in and buttoned up. This show is a ton of hours to produce, and we could use your support. You can learn more by checking out the video description down below. So we just got done going through the Turbo 400 Pump. Up next, we're going to be tackling the valve body. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell too, so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Once again, my name's Robert, and I will see you next time.